Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Aquarium Online Academy. My name is Amanda, and I'm coming to you live from the Aquarium of the Pacific in Long Beach, California, where for the next half hour, we will be exploring and discovering more about bioluminescence and the deep sea. So I'm excited that you decided to join us today, and if you would like to participate as we speak about these things and contribute any questions that you have, you are welcome to contact us at the number that you see on your screen right here, 562-286-1838, because we would love to answer your questions live. Now, I have two friends that are helping me here in the studio. I have Alicia, who's controlling the computer and the screens behind me, and I also have Stacy, who is ready to respond to your texts as they come in and let me know what those questions are. So let's go ahead and start exploring. Now, if you live in the Southern California area, there's a very good chance that you've heard a lot about bioluminescence in the news recently, because something very exciting has been happening off our coast. And while I realize a number of you probably weren't able to go out and actually look at it yourselves, we have a picture that was taken by one of my friends, Kira Mathis, and this is a picture that was taken right here in Long Beach in the harbor. And what do you notice about the water? What seems unusual about this picture? Obviously, this is not the type of scene you would normally expect at night if you're driving in a boat on the water. Obviously, the water out here looks pretty dark. You can see the lights on the shore, but what's happening here? Why does this water seem to be glowing? Well, what you're looking at is bioluminescence. So what is bioluminescence? Bioluminescence is, think about the word bio meaning life, and luminescence to light up. So this is when biological organisms can create their own light. So how does that happen? Well, there's two things that need to be involved. These organisms will have something called luciferin, which is a molecule inside of their body. They also have an enzyme called luciferase, which will help this reaction to take place in the presence of oxygen. So when the luciferin is oxidated, it creates something called oxyluciferin and also light. So that is a byproduct that we're seeing right here is light coming from these organisms. But what kind of organism is it that's creating this light? Do you have any idea? If you know, give us a text and let us know if you've heard anything about this, because it kind of looks, I actually don't really see an organism looking at this. To me, it just looks like the water is glowing. So what properties would create the water to glow? Because we know water itself is not a living organism, right? It's not alive, but what is in the water that could be glowing that makes it look like this? Do you have any ideas? Well, it doesn't look like anything very large, even though it does take up a lot of space. So what kinds of small things live in the ocean? Well, if you think about small things, maybe one word that could come to your mind is the word plankton. Now, plankton oftentimes is very, very small, but not all plankton is small because plankton, by its definition, is something at the mercy of the ocean's currents. So it doesn't mean it's defined by size. It does make sense that anything small and microscopic would be plankton that could just be carried along with the ocean flows. However, it could also be a large animal, like a sea jelly. So sea jellies are an example of plankton as well. But it's something that can't swim against an ocean current. So was that just a whole bunch of sea jellies that were out in the water? You may have seen images like this that were out in the ocean, and it looks like those waves, as the crest of the waves come in, they look like this really bright blue color. So keep looking. You can see some of them down here. There's some glowing that was right there. Do you see those back in the distance? Yeah, those are glowing waves caused by these glowing bioluminescent organisms. And the type of plankton that it is that's causing this is called a dinoflagellate. So a dinoflagellate is almost like, it's like a plant-like organism that can swim. It can propel itself. And it's not really a plant, it's a type of algae, but it's a unicellular, so one-celled organism called a dinoflagellate. And there's different species of these. And the ones that have been glowing off our coast do not actually have toxins in them that could harm people. But there are some types of dinoflagellates that could have toxins in them that could be dangerous. Now, sometimes as they're releasing chemicals into the water, sometimes people can be sensitive to those. If people have sensitivities to airborne things, that is one thing that can happen. Now, Jenna wants to know, what do organisms use the light for? And that, of course, is a great question, because what is the purpose of having these glowing waves? Well, these little dinoflagellates have been found to create this bioluminescence when they are disturbed. Did you notice that it wasn't all of the ocean that was glowing? It was only the parts at the top of the wave that were really, really moving a lot. And so when that water is being disturbed, or as the boat was going through the water and kind of pushing through the water, all of those little tiny dinoflagellates in the water were thinking, oh my goodness, something is moving up against me, and I'm about to be eaten, perhaps. And so what they do in defense is they will bioluminesce. They create their own light to hopefully be a distraction to the predator trying to eat them. And then maybe if they startle the predator, then they can get away and survive. So that is one of the reasons why organisms will use their light. But there's a lot of different reasons that organisms in the ocean can use bioluminescence, and we'll explore those together. Moshi wants to know, how many feet can a whale dive? Ooh, speaking of the deep sea. Well, sperm whales can dive over 9,000 feet. So that's into the deepest part, well, not the deepest part of the water, but into the really deep parts of the water where the sunlight doesn't normally go. So that's an interesting thing to think about. As you go deeper in the water, there is less and less light available. Now, the bioluminescence that we were seeing at night here off our coast were caused by these dinoflagellates. And during the day, if you were to look in those areas, you may have noticed a reddish color at the surface of the water, and that's called a red tide. Red tides are caused by numerous dinoflagellates just coming over and just filling in the water, so that during the daytime, they can get lots of sunlight that's coming in, because they are what we call producers. So producers are taking energy from the sun, and they're producing their own energy. So just like plants do, dinoflagellates can do this too. So they're using the sunlight, but the colors of their bodies are actually kind of a reddish color. Now, if you're just talking about a few dinoflagellates, you're not going to see them because they're very small. Now, how small are they? Well, think about one strand of your hair. If you were to take one strand of your hair and look at it, and you were to take that circle, like clip it off and look at straight down the middle of it, that is about what they call about 50 microns or micrometers small, which is really, really tiny. Well, if you were to take that size, 1 micron, that is actually bigger. 50 microns, one human hair. That's actually bigger than a dinoflagellate is. So the dinoflagellates that were causing the red tide here are about 35 microns. So smaller, even a little bit more than half the size of the width of your hair, of the average human hair. So they're very tiny. So we're talking about millions upon millions upon, billions really, filling the ocean area, because just a small little container, like a liter, could have like 1 million dinoflagellates in it. So that's a lot of organisms, and when there's that many, the color of their bodies make the water appear that reddish color. Now, what happens if they die? Well, that can also cause another issue you may have noticed if you live near the beach at all. Some people have complained that sometimes it gets smelly after a red tide. And that's because as these organisms die off, since they don't live very long, it causes their bodies to, well, they start to decay. And for a decomposition to happen, there's bacteria in the water that is actually pulling out oxygen from the water. Now, as they're decaying and being decomposed, and it's using up oxygen, it's taking out oxygen from the water for other organisms that use it, causing those animals to die off. So sometimes there can be a die-off of organisms in the water as a result of red tide. So just something to kind of keep in mind. Every time there's one big thing that happens in the ocean, there's another way that things are affected. Okay, so a question came in. Jenna says, why does it glow blue instead of another color? And Jenna, that's another great question, because we usually see blue, sometimes green colors coming from the ocean, but why not other colors? As these animals are if they were up at the surface, I want you to look at the color of this one. First of all, just look, there's two different colors we're seeing here. We're seeing this bioluminescent sort of cloud coming from the shrimp. And the shrimp is doing the same thing that those dinoflagellates were doing, it is using this as kind of a distraction. If a predator is coming at it, it uses this for defense to help startle or distract the predator from eating the shrimp. But look at what color the shrimp is. It's red. Now, there's something significant about the color red in the ocean, because if you think about the light that comes from the sun, it's actually made up of different wavelengths. And if you use a prism, you can separate it, and that's when you see the colors of the rainbow: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Well, each one of those wavelengths, or each one of those colors, is a different wavelength. And the longer wavelength of the red, because the longest one is up at the top, and then the smallest ones are the violet, the longer it is, it actually is a weaker wavelength. It won't travel as far through the water. So as the light hits the water and it goes down, less of the red light is going to be able to get through the ocean, and a lot more of the blue light. And so an animal that's colored red in the ocean, as it is really deep, if that red light from the sun can't get down to it, those red wavelengths, it's not going to appear red. It won't be able to reflect the red back to your eye. Instead, it will look black. So actually being red is almost like being black and not being seen in the deep, dark sea. So blue is a color that actually can be seen a lot easier at the other depths. And so blue is one of the colors that you'll see. And it's a result of the chemical makeup of what's inside, the proteins, the molecules that are inside the organism as it's making this bioluminescence. So blue is the most common color you'll see. Sometimes you'll see a little bit of the greenish colors. However, there's an exception to this. There is a very interesting fish called a black moose jaw, and it creates a red light. It actually has red that it can see. And the reason you might wonder, well, why would it be red if you can't really see it? Well, it can create red because so many other organisms in the deep sea don't have the receptors where they would even be able to recognize red as a color in the ocean. And so they can use it to kind of light like a special little flashlight, using a special little light that no one else can see, and it can help them find their prey. So sometimes they use their bioluminescence to help them find their food. So if you have a red light and you're shining it on something, and that something that you're shining on doesn't even realize that it's red because it can't see red, it doesn't even know it's being illuminated. So it's not going to cause it to run away. So that's a great way that these organisms have been able to take advantage of using those different colors in the ocean. And then someone also asked, why is plankton small? Again, plankton doesn't always have to be small, but the smaller it is, and if there's a lot of it, it can actually float pretty well at the surface of the ocean, where plankton like the phytoplankton, the plant plankton, can get all that energy from the sun to help create its own food. Lauren says, how can the toxins hurt you? Well, it depends on the type of toxins. So the toxins, a lot of times associated with red tide, can be something that a little bit wouldn't hurt you. But if you were to eat an animal that's been living in that water, like a clam, shellfish, that can be filtering that water through them, well, as they filter the water out, they're getting all these dinoflagellates in their body and all the toxins in these little teeny tiny dinoflagellates. Well, as those are in their body and they're building up and getting bigger and bigger, then when we start to eat them, we're getting a higher concentration of these in our body. And it just might make you feel very sick. And not the best time to eat something if there's been a red tide, because you don't want to be eating any of the toxins that might be in those organisms. Now, this is a great view of some of the plankton that can be found right off our coast. These are the same things that we find in our water. In fact, this might even be a sample of some of the water we've taken for our classes before. This guy right here, this little critter, is called a copepod, and they're probably the most abundant type of plankton we have in our water. And you might notice it has two long antennae and kind of a, I don't know, kind of football-shaped body too. And one big eye right in the very center of it, and it kind of hops along. So that's a copepod, and it will be plankton all of its life. It is a type of animal plankton. What you're looking at here is what we call zooplankton, or the animal plankton. Again, very, very small, microscopic. Copepods are actually large enough you can see with your eyes if you look really, really carefully at some water. You might be able to see this little tiny white speck kind of moving. But most of these other ones are pretty small. You would have a really hard time seeing without a microscope. Okay. There is another, getting back to the toxins, there is a neurotoxin that can be found not in our area, but in another area. I want to say it's the Mediterranean or the Red Sea, where they actually have neurotoxins that could do nerve damage. So different types based on the different type of dinoflagellate that you're talking about. Okay, Mason wants to know, does the color disappear? So yeah, Mason, as you noticed when we were looking at the waves, as the waves were crashing, the the part that was being disrupted was colorful, and then it went kind of dark again. So these bursts only last for like 1/10 of a second, or maybe even less than that. So it's really, really fast. And then they'll have to produce more bioluminescence. But they don't bioluminesce for a long term, the dinoflagellates that we were talking about. Now, other organisms can use their they can use their bioluminescence and make it last a little bit longer. But why would they want to do that? Well, these are some organisms behind me that also use bioluminescence, because it's not just little tiny plankton that do it. There are jellies and there are all sorts of fish that can bioluminesce as well. Now, this is one of my favorite ones right here called a flashlight fish. The flashlight fish has this little patch right below its eye that it uses to light up. But why would it want to light up right below its eye? Well, scientists have been wondering about this too, and there's a few different ways that scientists have observed them using that. First of all, I want to note that it's actually bacteria that is making this bioluminescence in the flashlight fish. So in this little patch, they have special bacteria that can bioluminesce. And then they have a way of kind of allowing that to flash on and flash off. Some of them actually have a little patch that they use to either cover it up or lower it down so that they can turn that light on and off as they need to. And so they have found that sometimes what flashlight fish will do is they will swim this direction with their flashlight on, and then they turn it off, and then they swim the opposite direction. So why would that be helpful to the flashlight fish? Well, if you were being pursued by a predator, or if you were a predator watching the flashlight fish and you see all these little lights that are just kind of moving across the ocean and you're hungry and you're ready to eat, well, if you see the light moving this direction, what way are you going to start swimming? Yeah, you're going to start going that direction because you're like, well, last time I saw it, it was moving this way, so it's probably over here by now. When in reality, that flashlight fish lights up this way and then they go the opposite direction. So it's a great way to avoid being eaten. Now, it's also believed that perhaps they use that light right there to help them in schooling, since these are a type of fish that will school at night. So schooling is when the fish are close together, all swimming the same direction, close to each other. There's also something called shoaling, where the fish are all kind of hanging out together, but they're not necessarily going the same direction and doing the same thing. They're just kind of hanging out. Well, they believe that flashlight fish, because they are a schooling fish, might actually use this to help communicate with the other fish their schooling behavior. So that's kind of an interesting thing. Also, they've thought, well, maybe they use it to help them see because it's right below their eye. Maybe there's something that is allowing them to see where they're going, and that flashlight helps in that way. So a very interesting organism that could be using that bioluminescence in ways that we're not really completely sure of, but we're learning more as we observe them and watch them and do research. Now, there are some other pretty crazy looking fish here. You may have noticed this one. It's got this crazy thing on its, like the front, right before its mouth here, up on its head. Here's another one right here. Now, this is a type of fish you've probably seen in a movie. Can you think of any fish that have something that hang down from the top of their head? You probably can. They're called anglerfish. Now, an angler is a person who fishes, and this is a type of fish that fishes. And what it does is it has this bioluminescent organism that it uses to attract prey. So that's the other reason that a fish might bioluminesce, because as they are that one little light in the sea of darkness, well, it's going to create some curiosity. And as something comes over, it gets curious, that anglerfish can then just kind of eat it up. And there's also an interesting picture I think we'll be pulling up for you that will show you what an anglerfish, male and female fish, look like. So take a look at this fish for a minute and tell me what you notice. I've got a bunch of questions that are coming in. And my poor friend Stacy doesn't have any more space to write down questions. So let me go ahead and get through these questions. Cooper wants to know, what is the difference between this red tide and the red tide that causes sea life to die? Well, actually, Cooper, this could also cause sea life to die as it's using up all of that oxygen in the water. It also can be pulling it away from other sea life. So this is the same kind. Red tides are something that generally they kind of wreak havoc on some of the environment around them and the other animals that live in it. But they don't necessarily have the toxins in them. So it's not like direct contact with them is going to hurt them. This one is more a case that they will indirectly be affected by it. Also, do they always glow with bioluminescence, or does it happen only at certain times? Oh, well, that's a good question. So in the daytime, these organisms won't bioluminesce. They will only bioluminesce at night when it's dark, and they don't really need it so much, or they don't use it so much during the day, because at the daytime, they're up at the surface getting the light from the sun, and normally they'll sink back down. But when things are changing in the ocean and we're not getting the what we call upwelling that we normally get, where the nutrients come from the bottom and kind of push those dinoflagellates away somewhere else, then we end up seeing those dinoflagellates at night at the surface, when a lot of times they would be further back down. So it's kind of interesting how all these things all work together and create this really beautiful effect in our ocean that we get to witness. Taylor says, can biologists tell us what days and times we can see bioluminescence and red tide? Well, Taylor, that is something that scientists are working on. They haven't been able to do it yet. We've not been able to come up with a way to actively or correctly predict when a red tide is going to happen. But there are scientists out there that are very, very interested in this. And they also will keep an eye on the water for what we call harmful algal blooms. So when there are too many of a type of algae or a type of plankton even in the water that could be harmful, they're trying to find ways that would predict that and just be aware of that, so that we have a better understanding of what's really going on in the ocean. So they're working on it, Taylor. And if you feel like going into the field of marine biology, that is an area definitely worth investigating. Where can you see the bioluminescent waves? Well, the current red tide that we've recently had was seen all the way from Baja California and Mexico, all the way up to this LA area. So it's really, really big. That's a big space for this red tide to be. So specific areas, I don't know what areas right now. They're still having glowing waves. A lot of them, I think, are dying off now. But yeah, all along the coast here. So it's not very predictable. We don't know when we're going to see it. It just happened to work out this time. Why do the dinoflagellates die? It isn't natural. Yeah, these are organisms that don't necessarily have a long lifespan. And so they will die off eventually, but when you have that many all in one area, it uses up a lot of oxygen in the water, affecting the other animals as well. London wants to know, does the light protect the animals? So yes, the light can protect the animals. Again, it can help them find their food, and by shooting out that light at something, it can cause that predator that might be trying to eat it to think that that is like startling, and they get confused. And just like the shrimp that is squirting out this bioluminescence, and then an animal sees that and they kind of forgot what just happened because they're so shocked by the fact that, oh, there's blue light in front of me. I wasn't expecting that. And then the shrimp is able to get away. So that is one way it can protect itself. There are other fish that have photophores in their bodies that actually light up so that they blend in, like this hatchet fish right here. So they have these special little spots on the underside of their body that help them to blend in so that they match any light that could be coming up from the surface of the water. So if any organism is below them looking up, that lit underside is going to blend in with the light coming from the surface. So they use that. They call that counter illumination. So that kind of breaks apart any shadow they would be creating and makes it easier for them to blend in. So that's another way they use that to protect themselves. Another exciting way that they use it to protect themselves is how we've learned that sea jellies will use bioluminescence. So sometimes animals will bioluminesce to kind of let other animals know that, oh my goodness, something is starting to eat me and I don't want to be eaten. Is there any other hungry predator out there who wants to come to dinner and eat this thing that's going to eat me? And that's what they've discovered that this particular sea jelly will do. Now, what you're seeing is just a still shot of this bioluminescent jelly. So this is a jelly that normally, even on the inside here, it has these beautiful light displays that come from the very center and they move their way out. And they just have all this color flowing back and forth all over their body. But it lets other organisms know that, hey, I'm in trouble, because they found that this only happens when they seem to be at risk or disturbed. And so then it lets everyone else know, hey, there might be a lunch for you over here if you want to come and get it for me so I can get away. So it's a way that they can communicate that to other organisms in the ocean. Okay, and then Olivia said, can the light harm the animals? I'm not aware of any ways that the lights harm the animals, except if you were trying to not be seen by something. Anytime an organism lights up, that could create a risk that something else could see you. And so the organisms need to kind of figure out what's a greater risk. Is it better to be seen, allow myself to be seen by something else, or should I light up so I could attract other things over for me to eat? So that's one of the things that they have to deal with in the ocean. But lighting up itself doesn't actually. The bioluminescence is a natural thing that happens inside their body that does not hurt them. It just takes some energy from them. This is an example of a bioluminescent worm. So I can't tell you what species it is, but it is a beautiful worm that also can bioluminesce. So it's not just fish, it's not just sea jellies, it's not just plankton, it's also worms that can bioluminesce in the ocean. In fact, scientists think that certainly in different parts of the ocean, up to 75% of the marine life in the deep sea can bioluminesce. Here's another example of an organism that uses bioluminescence. This is actually a brittle star. And what this sea star will do is it will allow one of its legs, or its arms right here, to break off. As you know, sea stars can regrow or regenerate their arms if they lose them. But what's really interesting about this is as that arm walks away on its own, it can be lit up and attracting other organisms to it so that the rest of the sea star, the brittle star, can get away. So sometimes, and there are also sea jellies that will do this too. And it will also allow their stinging cells, their tentacles that are bioluminescent, to stick onto whatever might be trying to eat them. And if they let go of that tentacle, then it allows them to kind of bring attention to the animal trying to eat the sea jelly with that glowing tentacle all over it. So interesting strategies these animals in the ocean have. Mason, oh, we already said that, wants to know why the color disappears. And does it only happen once a year? And no, not necessarily. We don't have an exact time that it happens. It's not like a definite seasonal thing, and it doesn't happen every season. So it could happen at any time, just when the conditions are right. Miguel wants to know, if you capture some bioluminescence, how long will it last? Ooh, that's a good question. In fact, that might lead me to how we can show you what we do in one of our classes. Inside this bowl, you can't see it very well, but there are some little tiny plankton called ostracods. They're all dried out. They're not alive anymore. But if you add water and then stir it up, if you crush those open so that you can break apart that luciferin and the luciferase that are inside their bodies, and you add a little bit of water to it, you can actually create bioluminescence. But notice it starts to fade. Did you see it didn't glow for very long? Now what we were looking at, those little tiny specks inside that bowl, are called ostracods. And ostracods are a type of organism, a type of plankton, that also are known as deep sea fireflies, because fireflies are also an example of an animal that has bioluminescence, that we're more common with on land, not necessarily in the ocean. But the same thing is happening in the ocean. The same thing that's happening in the ocean is happening in the firefly. They're creating their own light, and this is the organism that does it. So again, inside of its body, it has luciferin, it has luciferase. And when this animal is no longer alive, it still has those chemicals and the enzyme inside of it. So when we kind of break it open and kind of expose it, then when that water hits it, it causes it to glow, but it didn't last for very long. You can't really keep it, because once it is all used up, it's gone. It's just kind of like the difference between bioluminescence, the light that's created from it, and the light from a light bulb when you turn it on, is that bioluminescence doesn't create any heat, and it doesn't have a continual source. The electricity can keep running to that light bulb and causing it to glow, but it will also give off heat. Bioluminescence is what they call cool heat, where it's not giving off much heat at all as it's transferring that energy into light. But again, it does get used up, and so it doesn't last very long. And it's not super bright. It works really well in the deep, dark ocean, but you wouldn't want a bioluminescent flashlight probably to help you get around if you were camping out at night. It probably wouldn't do you a whole lot of good. Okay, so Brody, what causes them to come up on certain times of the year? That's what Brody wants to know. And again, it's just the different types of things in the ocean, how they're all working together, how the water flow is, where is the water pushing all of these little plankton in the water, what are the water temperatures like, because if the wind is blowing, the wind can blow off that top layer and create space for the colder water with all the nutrients in it to come up to the top. So it's a cycling in the ocean. And so there are different things that all kind of have to work together for this. So it's not a definite seasonal thing, like I said, and it's not necessarily at certain times of the year. We've had them in the fall, we've had them in the spring. I don't know how often they happen, winter versus summer, but they happen pretty much, I think, potentially any time of the year, at least depending on where you are in Southern California. Lucas wants to know, how long do dinoflagellates live? And Lucas, I can't tell you exactly how long they live, but pretty short lifespans. If we find out an answer for you, we will let you know. But they are a very short-lived organism. Emily wants to know, what do plankton eat? And it depends on the type of plankton it is. If it's a phytoplankton, a plant plankton, it doesn't have to eat anything. It just needs the light from the sun, and it creates its own energy. If it's a type of zooplankton, like we were looking at those copepods that were swimming in the water, well, they might eat other phytoplankton, the plant plankton, or they might eat other zooplankton. So notice there's different sizes even of these zooplankton, and there's a little worm that's swimming around there too. And so these could potentially be preying on each other. So these copepods are going to eat other zooplankton that you see in here, like these little nauplii and water fleas that are darting around in the water. And then other types of plankton, like sea jellies, could eat even fish. So it all depends on the type of plankton that it is. River wants to know, are there major differences between male and female anglerfish? Thanks for bringing us back to the anglerfish. Yes, there are some major differences. So when we looked at that picture, we'll pull it up again in a minute, and we'll show you. We're looking at a female. So the female is actually much larger than the male. Did you happen to notice the male in the picture as well? Well, if you saw this thing that looks like this funny fin down at the bottom, that's actually a male anglerfish. And what happens is he gets attracted to the female when she releases pheromones, which are like smells that he can pick up on, and she lights up in just a certain right way that attracts him over to her. Well, then he will basically bite on and attach himself to her. And oddly enough, it doesn't bother her at all. She just absorbs him into her body. In fact, he doesn't even need to let go to go eat, because he just becomes part of her body. So she does all the hunting and eating, and he just latches on for the ride. And then even his heart, his whole circulatory system, starts to become part of her whole system. So these animals are created in such a way that when they come together, they are together forever. So it creates an opportunity for them to have offspring so that she never has to worry about not being able to have any babies. So they can have lots of babies because they are always attached. She's got a male right there to help her out with that. So interesting thing, not what I would think of as the most beautiful fish, but obviously this one did. So interesting fish, big belly, so she can eat a lot when she eats at one time. All right, well, we are out of time. But I hope you enjoy learning a little bit more about bioluminescence in the deep sea. And I hope you think about the fact that the deep sea and all these bioluminescent animals are still, there's only a little bit that we've really discovered about them. There's so much more that can be explored and discovered. Now, it can be hard to discover things in the deep sea because it's hard to get there. There's a lot of pressure when you go deep in the water. There's no light down there, and it's also very, very cold. But with new submersibles, ROVs, called remotely operated vehicles, like this one right here, it's how we're able to explore more about the ocean and learn more about it, even if we can't physically dive down there because it's too cold and there's too much pressure for us and our bodies couldn't handle it. So we can send these down here, down to the deepest part of the ocean. And do you know where the deepest part of the ocean is? It's actually in the Pacific Ocean. It's an area called, I think some of you said it, the Mariana Trench. And the deepest part of it is called the Challenger Deep. And there have only been 4 people who have ever experienced the deepest part of the ocean. So only 4 times have humans, or actually 3 times, 2 of them were together, went down to the deepest part of the ocean in a manned submersible. So in a submersible, they were in themselves. And the most recent one was was actually last year in 2019. Victor Vescovo, I believe was his name, was an explorer who went down to the deepest part of all the oceans of the world. It's very neat. I can't wait to learn more about the story that he has to share about his expeditions. But more people have actually walked on the surface of the moon than have been to the deepest part of our own planet. So there is still so much to be explored. Scientists have said only about 5% of the ocean has been explored. So if you're thinking about going into marine biology, there is a lot that is out there for you to discover. And our main way of discovering and learning more about these animals that we normally can't see is by using things like ROVs and using really awesome technology. And I'd encourage you to check out even nautiluslive.org. If you go to nautiluslive.org, you can actually see a research vessel and you can watch real life research and exploration as it's happening. And you can even write in questions on the computer as you're looking through the eyes of the camera that they have hundreds of feet, thousands of feet below you, below the surface of the water, and you can see what they're seeing at the very same time the scientists are seeing it. And so we've had some opportunities to talk with them on their expeditions and learn more about them. But I always like to encourage people to check it out because it's something you can do from home. Now, currently, their staff is not out on any voyages right now, but they are keeping an eye on things. So this is the website you want to go to, nautiluslive.org. And you can learn more about the expeditions they're planning on and what they're seeing and what they're discovering, and you can watch real time as they're doing it. So you can be an explorer right now. You don't have to wait until you get your degree, but you can do it right now and join along with them. But thank you for joining us again today. Sorry we went over a little bit. There's just so much to talk about when you're talking about the deep sea and bioluminescence. So thanks for joining us. If you have any further questions, you can still email us at live@lbaop.org. So just so you can see it here, live@lbaop.org, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you might have when we get a chance. Thanks. Bye.